The air in the royal chamber hung thick with perfume, floral, musky, cloying, meant not just to please the senses, but to drown something far less elegant, the scent of decay. Behind the velvet curtains, under the layers of powder white lead and crimson rouge, sat Elizabeth Tudor, the Virgin Queen. Her posture was perfect, her gaze was steel, her dress stitched with pearls that glittered like moonlight on water. But lean in too close, and you would catch a different truth. The Queen's breath, heavy and sour. Her smile, guarded. Her mouth, rarely opened in public. Why? No one in court, not even her most trusted ladies-in-waiting, ever saw Elizabeth I brush her teeth. It was not that she did not care about appearances, in fact, she obsessed over them. Every morning, a full ritual transformed her, the white foundation layered to cover the scars of smallpox, the deep red lips painted to command attention, the hair, often a wig, arranged into a towering spectacle of imperial power. Her body was a canvas of control, every inch of skin, every detail, every shadow carefully hidden. But behind her tightly closed lips was the one thing she could not paint over, rot. By her 50s, Elizabeth's teeth had blackened, loosened, and in some cases, reportedly fallen out entirely. Her breath grew so foul that foreign ambassadors wrote about it in horror. And yet, there is no record, public or private, of her ever brushing her teeth. No description of a toothbrush, no mention of a cleaning ritual. In a court obsessed with ceremony, hygiene was a whispered horror. And in Elizabeth's world, the body was not a human thing, it was political. She could not afford to be seen as weak, least of all, unclean. It did not begin with rot, it began with sweetness. Elizabeth I was addicted to sugar, not just as a taste, but as a symbol of wealth and control. While England's poor lived on dark bread and sour ale, the Queen sipped spiced wine and nibbled on candied violets, orange peels dipped in syrup, and rose petals soaked in honey. Sugar was not yet known to be dangerous, it was medicine turned madness. In portraits she is regal, composed, draped in silver and red, but what those paintings never show is the blackness slowly creeping across her teeth, the holes forming beneath her gums, the quiet agony of royal indulgence. She once gifted her courtiers sugar loaves wrapped in silk, she once kept candied ginger beside her bed. Her physicians warned her, gently, too gently, they could not speak the truth to a queen who believed she was chosen by God, so she kept eating, kept smiling without opening her mouth, kept breathing through sweetened breath laced with rot, and still she refused what others in Europe were beginning to adopt, toothpicks carved from bone, rinses made with herbs and vinegar, even cloths soaked in wine to clean the mouth. Elizabeth did none of this. She believed, perhaps, that cleanliness was a private thing, or perhaps she feared what it would reveal, the looseness of a molar, the bleeding in her gums, the taste of blood behind the sugar. There are whispers in the letters of foreign guests, Spanish diplomats noting her breath filled with corruption, French envoys claiming her words were painful to hear not for their content, but for the scent that followed them, and yet her court stayed silent. They bowed, they flattered, they looked away, because the Queen was not a woman, she was England itself, and England could not have a rotting mouth. By the time Elizabeth reached her late 50s, her mouth had become a battlefield, blood and ivory, the gums inflamed, the roots exposed, teeth that once anchored her voice now slipped with every word. She could not bite into meat, could not chew bread without pain. Some say she survived on mashed vegetables and broths, others say she simply refused to eat in front of witnesses. Her plates returned nearly untouched. The royal kitchens buzzed with wasted feasts, the food untouched was not insult, it was protection, for she would rather starve than let the court see her struggle to chew. Her physicians were called, but they could offer little, they pulled what they could with crude iron tools, no pain relief, no sterilization, just force and cloth and blood, and Elizabeth endured it all in silence. She would not scream, would not faint, would not lose her mask, because to bleed before others was to break the illusion, and her illusion was everything. She began to speak less, laugh less, she grew quieter in court, her once dazzling conversation turned into gestures and glances. She covered her mouth with fans, with gloves, with the edge of her sleeves, anything to hide the disintegration within, and those who served her knew the rules. They were not to speak of it, not to ask, not to offer help. they watched her suffer in silence, and they obeyed, because the queen's body was sacred, and sacred things were never questioned, but the pain did not stop, and neither did the fear. With every tooth lost, she lost a piece of herself, not just bone and blood, but command, dignity, the power of voice, and still, she never brushed her teeth, not in public, not in secret, because if no one saw her clean herself, then no one could know she was ever dirty. The mirrors in Elizabeth's chambers were not for truth, they were for illusion. Each morning she sat for hours as her face was rebuilt from powder and paint, layer upon layer of white lead, thick enough to hide the pockmarks from her youth, thick enough to seal the skin like a mask, rouge for the cheeks, kohl for the brows, vermilion for the lips, but never anything for the teeth, because the teeth could not be saved, only concealed. When she smiled, it was quick and closed. When she spoke, it was soft and guarded, and always from behind something, a jeweled fan, a silk hand, a careful turn of the head. She became a living portrait, controlled, frozen, divine, but inside the paint, her skin blistered, cracked, poisoned by the very powders that preserved her legend. Physicians whispered that her flesh beneath the makeup was softening, turning gray, that the sores beneath the surface leaked when the paint was wiped away. But no one dared speak it aloud, no one dared ask why the queen's hand trembled more each year, why her eyes watered, why her lips bled through the rouge, because Elizabeth was England, and England could not weep. She believed the paint gave her power, and in a way, it did. Foreign princes feared her, her enemies saw only brilliance and beauty, but her ladies knew better. They saw the towels stained with blood, the pillows spotted with pus, they smelled the bitter rot behind the lavender oil. And still they obeyed, still they helped her build the lie, day after day, until lie became legend, and legend became law. And if no one ever saw the queen brush her teeth, it was because the queen had become someone who no longer needed to, because gods do not bleed, and queens do not decay. She began to fear silence, and yet she surrounded herself with it. The court grew quieter around her, the music softened, the conversations hushed. Even her closest advisers lowered their voices in her presence, not out of respect, but out of uncertainty, because the queen who once ruled with thunder now moved like mist, thin, fragile, untouchable. She no longer rode horses, no longer danced, no longer delivered long speeches beneath open sky. Her body ached, her jaw throbbed, her head spun. The poisons in her makeup burned her flesh, the sugars she still consumed gnawed at her from within, but she refused to stop. Refused to surrender to the physical. The body was only a shell, and the crown was greater. Even as her teeth loosened more, even as her meals shrank to warm broth and crushed fruit, she held to her habits, her rituals, her legend. She still painted herself each day, still dressed in gowns that weighed more than her limbs could bear, still stared into the mirror as if daring it to reflect her truth, but it never did. It showed only the queen she demanded to be, flawless and eternal. Beneath it all her mouth became a wound, raw and swollen, her gums bled with every word, her breath thickened with sickness, but she spoke as little as possible, chose silence over weakness, and when she had to speak, she used few words, simple commands, soft as breath. Her courtiers leaned in to hear her, but they never saw her lips part, never glimpsed what lay behind the mask. Not even at night, for she no longer allowed anyone to undress her. She dismissed her maids early, bathed in solitude, combed her wigs alone. She could not let anyone see, not now, not when the pain had made her mortal again, and though she ruled an empire, she did so from behind closed doors, through parchment and signature, never face to face, because her body had betrayed her, and she could not let the world know. The days grew shorter, or perhaps time itself shrank, bending around her like a collapsing stage set. Courtiers came and went, but her presence grew ghostly. She appeared less and less, and when she did, she stood in shadows, always upright, always in full dress, as if frozen in a painting. She refused to lie down, refused to sleep, for she feared that if she did, she would never rise again. They begged her to rest, to take to her bed, but she only stood, sometimes for hours, her feet blistered. Inside shoes stitched with pearls, her spine stiff from corsets that no longer fit her wasting frame. She would not undress, not before anyone, not even her most trusted. The mirror too was now hidden. She had it removed. She said she no longer needed it, but the truth was simpler. She could not bear to see what time had done to her, not even for a moment. she clutched her robes as if they held her together. Layers of silk and velvet draped over decay, every breath shallow, every word forced. And yet she refused to let go. She gave no final address, no speech of farewell, only silence. She held to life not with strength but with will, sheer, stubborn will, the kind that had once broken rebellions and crushed kings, but now it fought only against her own body, and it was losing. Her teeth were gone, or what remained were fragments, blackened roots that ached even in silence. She had long since stopped eating anything solid. Her face was gaunt, hollowed beneath the layers of white. But no one could look long enough to see it, because she would not let them. Even her doctors dared not touch her, dared not speak of death, for fear she would banish them, or worse, outlive them. The court tiptoed through those last days, uncertain if she still ruled or merely lingered, and in that silence she remained, standing in the center of a vanished world, the last monarch of her kind, holding on not to life, but to image, to myth, to the fear that if anyone saw her as she was, the age would end. When she finally passed, there were no witnesses to the exact moment. Not even her ladies in waiting could say when breath left her body, for she had forbidden them to draw near. She died alone, upright in a chair, clothed in silk and pearls, as if still alive. They found her hours later, rigid and cold, yet still terrifying in appearance, her face masked in white paint, her lips drawn tight as if daring anyone to speak of what they saw. And so they didn't. They whispered instead. They cleaned and dressed the corpse again, though it was already dressed. They adjusted the wig, powdered the hands, stitched her mouth shut, not with thread but with silence. The death of Elizabeth I was not marked with mourning but with ritual, every act choreographed to preserve the illusion. Her body was placed in a lead-lined coffin, sealed tight, not to honor her but to conceal her decomposition. The people were told she died peacefully. They were shown a figure lying in state, shrouded in royal symbols, but no one ever saw her face. Not once. The curtains of the catafalque never parted and the coffin remained unopened. Not even her physicians were allowed to cut or examine her body. She left no heirs, no direct descendants, only a kingdom unsure whether to grieve or breathe again, for even in death she ruled through fear and secrecy. No portraits were painted in her final months, none were permitted. She had ordered her image frozen decades before, and that was the image that lived on, pale, impassive, powerful. Her funeral procession was grand. Thousands lined the streets to watch her coffin pass, and yet the greatest mystery lay not in the pageantry but in what was hidden inside. Beneath gold and velvet and flags, a corpse ravaged by age and rot, a woman who had not been seen, truly seen in years, now vanished completely. The myth was sealed in a box and lowered into the ground where none could disturb it. What Elizabeth I left behind was more than a kingdom. It was a carefully constructed fiction built on denial, silence, and performance. Her reign became legend not because of what she did but because of what she refused to let others see. She made herself immortal through omission, by hiding her body, her habits, her decay. She became a symbol, not a person, a sovereign beyond flesh, beyond fault. History absorbed the mask and forgot the woman. Scholars for centuries debated her politics, her virginity, her image, but rarely her body, rarely the grime of her daily life. The blood, the sweat, the stink, the sickness. The queen who never brushed her teeth became the queen who never aged. In portraits, never weakened. In public, never slept or bled or cried behind locked doors. Her successors found it impossible to live up to her because they had to be human, and she had refused to be. Elizabeth's legacy was a blueprint for control, power through mystery, presence through absence. Even in modern eyes she remains untouched, unknowable, regal and cold, because that is how she planned it. The portrait that survived was the one she curated, a queen not of England but of myth. As time passed, no one asked where her teeth went, what her breath smelled like, how many wigs she owned, or how often she washed, because to ask those questions was to admit she had been real, and real is not what people wanted from Elizabeth I. They wanted a figure, a god, a ghost wrapped in ruffs and rouge who walked above the filth of the world. She ruled, she gave them that, and they believed it, and centuries later they still do.